The Echo. Chapter 1. The Briefing. Daniel Cross looked at the clock on his wrist as the second pointer moved back. He should already be used to this type of paradox, but the vision still made him shudder. In the normal world, time was a straight line. For him, it was a circle that folded upon himself. And now, he had an impossible mission: to avoid a cataclysmic event called the point of silence, where the flow of time would collapse. In the operating room, an imposing gray man waited patiently. He was Director Grant, head of Operation Eco. On the table, there was a folder with the National Intelligence Seal, containing information that should never see the light of day. "Daniel, this time it's not just espionage," Grant started, with the seriousness of those who knew there was no room for mistakes. "You will deal with the unimaginable. Someone discovered how to reverse the flow of time on a global scale. If we do not prevent, the past and the future will collide, erasing everything we know." Grant pushed a small rectangular device toward Daniel. "This is the temporal pacemaker. It keeps you anchored at the right time while everything around you can move back or forth." Daniel took the device and noticed a slight tremor in his own hands. He had trained for this, adrenaline injections to confront the absurdity. But this time it was different. He was not just trying to save the future. He was competing against him. "There is a name involved," Grant continued, as if each word carried the weight of a time bomb. "Leona Voss. Bright scientist, and dangerous. She knows how to cause collapse and has already started activating the first time waves. You need to find it and find out how to reverse it." The watch on the wall emitted a shrill beep, but to Daniel the sound seemed to come from the past. He looked at Grant. The mind is already accelerating in 1,000 directions. "You have 72 hours, concluded Grant. "And remember, some moments that seem to be the future, they may have happened." Daniel left the room with the folder in hand and the weight of the world on his shoulders. He knew the mission was starting now, but at the same time, he might have ended. After all, in a war against time, when are you really in the present? Liking the story so far? Subscribe and share to follow every moment of this temporal suspense. Chapter 2. The First Anomaly. Hours later, Daniel was already on the field in the city of Vienna, one of the first zones affected by the temporal anomaly. He moved as a ghost, invisible to most people around him, at least for those who were not stuck in the reverse flow. The track had taken him to an abandoned gallery. Something had happened there. It was possible to feel the strange texture of time bending in the air. Half of the gallery was frozen at an eternal moment, while the other half seemed to be running backwards. Daniel adjusted his time mark to remain synchronized with the correct flow and entered. That's when he saw her, Leona Voss. She was standing in the middle of the gallery, her cold eyes and fixed calculators in a sculpture that fell apart and rebuilt at the same time. Her blonde hair floated as if he was underwater or in the future. "I knew you would come," she said, without turning around. Her voice echoed in a strange way, as if every word was being pronounced both in the present and past. Daniel pulled the pistol, but she slowly lifted a hand. "You can't stop me," he murmured. "The collapse has begun. The only question is, will you be on the right side when it is over?" Before he could react, she squeezed a small device on her wrist. A silent roar crossed the air, and Daniel felt his body be pulled by an invisible force. The world around him began to unfold back. He could see the past reconstructing as scenes from a rebobbited movie. Leona disappeared in temporal distortion, but not without first leaving an enigmatic message. "Not everything you think you know happened as you think, Daniel. Sometimes the echo comes before sound." Suddenly he was thrown out of the gallery, falling to his knees on the sidewalk. The pacemaker on his wrist blinked in red. He was out of sync. Without wasting more time, Daniel adjusted the device. He took a deep breath and murmured to himself, "It's just beginning." "Want to know what happens next?" Subscribe and share to keep following Daniel's story against time. Chapter 3. The Watcher. Back at the hotel in Vienna, Daniel frantically studied the gallery's data. Every moment passed seemed a step closer to the disaster, or maybe he was one step away from something that had already happened. Leona's words echoed in his mind, "Not everything you think you know happened as you think." While adjusting the temporal pacemaker to make sure it was synchronized, an unexpected notification came on his encrypted phone. It was a message without sender, with an annex that contained coordinates. He hesitated for a moment, aware that he could be a trap, but decided to follow his instinct. The coordinates took him to an old and deserted cathedral in the heart of the city. The doors were open, but the place seemed frozen in time, as if waiting for him. Inside, Daniel found someone unexpected, a black man, sitting calmly in one of the wooden benches. "You're late," the stranger said with an enigmatic smile. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, feeling the weight of the gun under the coat. "I am an observer," said the man. "I see the echoes before they form." Daniel could not tell if this was a metaphor or a distorted reality. All he knew was that the men seemed to know more than he should. "What is Leona trying to do?" Daniel asked impatiently. The observer smiled. "She is not trying to destroy time. She is trying to free him." "Free?" Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means that collapse is inevitable. But, if you find the point of origin of the echo, you can rewrite it." The men paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "Ask yourself, Daniel, what if all this has happened before? And if you are just following the footsteps of a past that tried to change and failed?" Before Daniel could process the information, the sound of passos echoed through the cathedral. The observer got up slowly. "She's closer than you think. The question is, will you find it in time?" So, as if he had never been there, the man disappeared, leaving Daniel alone in the cathedral, with more questions than answers. The clock on Daniel's wrist began to blink red again. "Curse," he murmured. Time was running out, or perhaps it had already been exhausted. What do you think you are coming? Subscribe and share to accompany this suspense to the end. Chapter 4. The Convergence. Daniel ran through the streets of Vienna, following the next track, an underground laboratory, which according to the observer, would be the point of convergence between normal and inverted time. Every second made the feeling of déjà vu increased, as if he was reliving moments he should never have forgotten. The laboratory was a maze of metal corridors and sealed rooms. Daniel activated his temporal pacemaker to stay synchronized as he searched the files. He found what he was looking for, a huge machine, covered with wires and monitors flashing. It was a temporal inverter prototype, created by Leona to manipulate the flow of time on a planetary scale. Before he could investigate more, a siren sounded, filling the laboratory with an intermittent red light. He turned, gun in hand, but it was too late. Leona Voss was behind him, holding a device that shone with reverse energy. "You don't understand, Daniel," she said, approaching slowly. "If we do not reverse time, we will be condemned to repeat it forever. And do you think destroying the gift is the solution?" He replied, his finger in the trigger. Leona stepped forward with a disturbing calm. "I've seen the end, Daniel. And the end is an echo of the beginning. The only way to escape is to break the cycle." Daniel tried to reason with her, but his mind was divided between what was real and what could be just a distorted memory of something he had ever lived. The watch on his wrist began to whistle again, signaling temporal interference. Suddenly the lab floor began to tremble. The air filled with a strange vibration, as if time were literally shattering around them. "Choose, Daniel," Leona said, giving him a second time mark. "If you want to save the gift, you need to go back to the point of origin. But if you can't, the collapse will consume everything." The quake intensified, and Daniel knew he didn't have much time to decide. He looked at the device in his hand and, for the first time, realized maybe he had made that choice before. Curious to know what will be Daniel's choice? Subscribe and share to find out how this temporal plot will unfold. Chapter 5. The Loop. The floor was shaking as if you were about to disintegrate. Daniel squeezed the temporal pacemaker that Leona had given her. He needed to decide to go to the point of origin and try to avoid collapse, or trust her science and let the cycle be broken the way she suggested. With a quick movement, he synchronized the device. The room around him began to vibrate violently, and then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. He was no longer in the lab. The cold light gave way to a deep blue sky, and he found himself stopped in the same cathedral he had visited before. But something was different this time. The air carried a strange weight, as if he were between two moments of time. The clock on its wrist scored 1 second, flashing intermittently. Then he heard steps behind him. Spinning with the gun in hand, Daniel saw he himself. A perfect echo of himself, moving like an inverted shadow. "So that's it," Daniel murmured. "We are stuck in a cycle." Before he could react, his other self Daniel from the past advanced to attack him. They rolled down the cathedral floor, both trying to reach control of the situation. Now he knew the truth. He was not the first Daniel to try to stop Leona. And judging by the unfolding of things would not be the last either. "I've made this choice before." He realized, the heart speeding up. His echo was not an enemy. It was a warning. Daniel of the past muttered an incomplete phrase, just as the observer had said before it disappeared. Echo comes before sound. With sudden clarity, Daniel stopped resisting. He let out the gun and let his self of the past take control. The cycle was repeating, and he finally understood. Trying to fight him was the mistake. He needed to let it happen. Only then would it have a chance to break the cycle. Do you think Daniel finally found the key to save time? Subscribe and share to find out how it all ends. Chapter 6. The Last Choice. All around Daniel began to dissolve. The cathedral, the other, and even the feeling of gravity. It was as if they were falling through time, without starting or ending. Then he landed, back to the laboratory with Leona Voss. She stared at him, the reversal device in her hand flashing with unstable energy. Daniel looked at the clock on his wrist. Now he knew this was the crucial moment. This was the point of origin. If he made the right decision, the cycle would be broken. Then, Leona challenged him with an impenetrable look. "Are you going to try to prevent collapse, or trust that I can save you?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Every version of him that had gone through this moment made the wrong choice, and the cycle continued. But this time, he would do differently. He opened his eyes and smiled. "I trust you." Leona blinked, surprised, but only for a second. Without hesitation, she activated the device. The world around them fell on fragments of light and shadow. It was as if the time itself is reconfiguring, not like a straight line, but as a new beginning. And then everything stopped. Daniel opened his eyes and realized that he was back to the 0 point, sitting in the operating room with Director Grant, just as at the beginning. But there was something different. The clock on Daniel's wrist did not move backwards. For the first time he was in sync. Grant smiled. "It looks like we got it." The echo was erased. Daniel smiled back, relieved. He had made the right choice. But deep in his mind, a doubt still persisted. What if the cycle had not really been broken? What if all he had done would just create a new echo? The end. If you enjoyed our story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.